Hello and welcome to my presentation on using literary text in L2 reading. This presentation is a hybrid of the listening to the text activity on page 119 of our text and the questions activity on page 112 of our text. My intended learners are high, intermediate, high school students from various cultural and linguistic backgrounds. The students will be listening to a reading of the poem The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. I chose a poem for this activity because this type of text lends itself well to works that are meant to be performed. Furthermore, the interplay of rhyme and meter, as well as the playful yet strategic use of vocabulary and structure in poetry, is both engaging and thought-provoking for the reader and listener. I chose a poem by Robert Frost because he is a quintessential American poet. I don't think there is a student in this country who has not studied one of his works in an L1 English class. The themes he presents are cut from the very fabric of American culture and ideology, but also speak to universal truths about the human experience that any reader can relate to. The Road Not Taken is short, only 4 stanzas, and it features ordinary language, allowing L2 readers to readily engage with its deeper meaning. It is also open to interpretation, which allows for debate and critical thinking. Frost himself referred to the poem as tricky, which suggests that its message may not mean exactly what it appears to be on the surface. Okay, class, today we're going to talk about poems. How would you define what a poem is? What kind of things do we typically see in poems? I'm going to write your ideas on the board here. Yeah, that's right. Poems have rhyme. A lot of times they rhyme. Yeah, good point. Sometimes it kind of sounds like a song, but it doesn't have the music. Because poetry, it's defined by the rhythm of the words when they're spoken. There's usually like a rhythm to it, and in poetry they call that meter. What else do we see? Yep, sometimes there's a lot of complicated words and we don't always know what the poet's trying to say just from looking at the words. We got to think about it, right? So do you guys like to read poetry? Okay, I see some of you nodding yes, some nodding no. Can you name any poets? Pablo Neruda, yep, he's really well known in Latin America for his poetry. Shakespeare, William Shakespeare, England, yep, he's known for his plays and for his poetry. So why do you think somebody would choose to write a poem instead of a short story? Good point. They might want to use the language playfully and take advantage of rhyme and rhythm that a poem can offer. Or maybe they want to focus on an emotion or a feeling rather than, just telling a story for the beginning and a middle and an end. Or it could be that they want the reader to think about the meaning and give the words their own interpretation. Or maybe it's that they want the poem to be read aloud. It could be that. And that's what we're going to do today. You're going to listen to a poem by an American poet named Robert Frost called The Road Not Taken. And I'll give you a copy of that text so you can follow along. Robert Frost lived from 1874 to 1963. I chose Robert Frost because even though he lived quite a while ago, he's still a highly regarded poet in American literature, and his works are often studied by students just like you in American schools. The words he uses in this poem are not going to be difficult for you to understand, so you should be able to follow the text as you listen to the poem being read. And as you do, I'd like you to think about what the word ironic means. What makes something ironic? Well, one way to think about that is with an example. Like, let's say a fire station burns down. We wouldn't expect that to happen at a fire station, right? And that makes that event ironic. In other words, something ironic is when the reality of the situation is different than what we would expect. Or let's say there's a bad snowstorm outside and I say, what beautiful weather we're having today. Well, that would be kind of an ironic statement because my words don't really match what's actually happening outside. So keeping that in mind, let's listen to a reading of The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost.
The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and, sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler, long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet, knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere, ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference.
So what did you guys think about the poem? Were you able to follow along with the text as it was being played? Were there any words that were new to you or that you didn't understand? Yes? Okay, well, let's talk about them. Diverged. Diverged means split apart. So in the poem, the path the narrator is traveling on splits into two different directions, so they've diverged. Claim. Claim can have different meanings depending on the context. Here, the narrator is telling us that the path that he chose had more to offer for him, which is why he took that path and not the other. Trodden, well, that means stepped on. So if something is trodden on, it's been stepped on. And here he tells us that the leaves on both paths had not turned black from being stepped on, so neither path was more worn than the other. Hence. Hence is a literary term. That's not a word you're going to hear in everyday conversation. But here, hence means in the future. So the narrator is telling us here that he's going to be telling this story in the future. Any other vocabulary questions? No? Okay. Well, I got a couple questions for you. I'd like you to think about them. I'm going to hand them out on a worksheet. I'd like you to think about the answers, and I'll give you some time to write down your ideas on the worksheet. Then I'll divide you into pairs, and you can share your ideas with your partner. And after you've had enough time to talk, we'll come back together as a class and share our ideas. So here's the questions I'd like you to think about. What is the setting of the poem? Where is this taking place? And think about, what is the narrator's problem? What is the conflict that he's facing, that he's telling us the story? Ask yourself, do you think the narrator regrets his choice? Meaning, do you think he regrets the path that he took? And think about which line or lines stood out to you the most and why. Answer this question, how did the poem make you feel? And what did you think about the ending? Did you think that the narrator was being ironic, sincere, sarcastic? What are your ideas about that? Okay, let's share some of our ideas. So what's the setting of the story? Sure, it's the woods, right, or forest, and that's certainly supported by the language in the poem. He talks about the yellow wood, there's references to leaves, there's an image of a grassy trail, which gives the impression that this is an unpaved trail. And what's his problem? What's the conflict that he's facing? Some of you thought that it was trying to decide which path to take, and then some of you thought the conflict arose after he made the choice because he seemed to be struggling with his decision. As for regret, well, that's open to interpretation. He talks about telling the story in the future with a sigh, which suggests a certain sadness or frustration. And what line stood out to you the most? Yeah, that last line, that really stands out, doesn't it? Not only is it the end of the poem, but it just has a different rhythm than the other lines, doesn't it? And how did this poem make you feel? Sad? Depressed? Okay. Alone? Free? Independent? Nostalgic? Yeah, those are all really good thoughts. And what did you think about the ending? Some of you thought that the narrator was being sincere and was talking about choosing his own path. Did any of you see any irony in the poem? I mean, he talks about the path he chose making all the difference, but then he tells us that one path is very much like another. Do you think that says something about the choices we make and free will? I mean, do all roads lead to the same place? There's no right or wrong answers to these questions. The poem means whatever meaning you assign to it, and that's the true beauty of poetry. Thank you so much for your thoughtful participation today. I hope you enjoyed the poem and that it inspires you to read other poems by Robert Frost or other American poets. That's the end of my presentation. Thanks for listening.